The child had been standing at the edge of the square for 20 minutes, and no one had looked at her twice. Mara noticed because she'd been watching, not intentionally at first, just the way you notice anything slightly wrong in a familiar landscape. The girl was maybe 7 or 8, wearing a dress that had probably been beautiful once, deep burgundy velvet with silver embroidery at the collar. Now it hung too large on her thin frame, the hem dragging in the dust. Her hair fell in dark waves past her shoulders, and she stood perfectly still with her small hands clasped in front of her, her face tilted slightly upward as if listening to something no one else could hear. The marketplace hummed with its usual afternoon chaos, vendors calling out prices, carts rattling over cobblestones, the smell of fresh bread mixing with horse manure and herbs. People flowed around the child like water around a stone, their eyes sliding past her as if she were invisible. A woman with a basket nearly knocked into her, then jerked away at the last second with a sharp intake of breath, hurrying on without apology. Mara's shift at the tavern didn't start for another hour, but she found herself unable to look away. The girl hadn't moved. Hadn't called out for help or wandered toward any of the stalls. Just stood there in her too big dress, waiting. For what? Mara thought, then immediately wondered why it mattered to her. She had her own problems. The rent on her room was due in 3 days, and she was still short by half. Her feet ached from yesterday's double shift, and she needed to stop by the apothecary to pick up more of the salve for the burns on her forearms, an occupational hazard of carrying too many hot plates. She should go home, rest, not stand here watching a strange child who was probably fine, who probably had parents nearby, who probably didn't need. The girl's head turned slightly, and Mara saw her eyes for the first time. They were pale, almost colorless, with that unfocused quality that Mara recognized from her younger brother before he died. Blind. The child was blind, and she was alone, and everyone was pretending she didn't exist. Mara's feet were moving before she'd made a conscious decision. "Hey," she said softly as she approached, not wanting to startle the girl. "Are you lost?" The child's head tilted toward her voice, those strange pale eyes not quite finding Mara's face. Up close, Mara could see that the girl's skin had an unusual quality to it, too smooth, too pale, like porcelain or marble. And there was something else, something that made the hair on the back of Mara's neck stand up, though she couldn't have said what. "I'm waiting for my father," the girl said. Her voice was quiet, carefully modulated, with an accent Mara couldn't place. "He told me to stay here." "How long ago did he tell you that?" "I'm not sure." The girl's fingers tightened slightly against each other, the only sign of distress. The sun was higher. Hours, then. Mara glanced around the square again, saw the same deliberate avoidance in every face that passed them. Something cold settled in her stomach. "What's your name?" "Elara." "I'm Mara." "When did you last eat, Elara?" The girl considered this. "Yesterday morning." The cold feeling spread. Mara crouched down so she was at the child's level, though she knew Elara couldn't see her. "Would you like to come with me? There's a tavern just across the square." Before I continue with this story, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video if you want more stories like this. Write in the comments which city you're watching from, and then we'll continue with the story. We can get you some food and wait for your father there. It's easier to see the whole square from the doorway. She was lying about that last part, you couldn't see the whole square from the tavern entrance at all, but something in her gut told her she needed to get this child out of the open, away from all those carefully averted eyes. Elara hesitated, her head tilting as if listening again. Finally, she nodded. "All right. Thank you." She held out her hand, and Mara took it. The child's fingers were ice cold, and so small they seemed to disappear in Mara's calloused palm. They'd barely made it 5 steps when Mara felt it, a shift in the air, a sudden hush that fell over the marketplace like a blanket smothering sound. The hair on her arms stood up. She looked back and saw people backing away, clearing a space in the center of the square. Some made signs with their hands, old protective gestures her grandmother had taught her as a child. One woman grabbed her child and ran. A man stood where the crowd had parted. No, Mara thought, not a man. Something that looked like a man, if you didn't look too closely. If you ignored the way shadows seemed to cling to him even in the bright afternoon sun, the way the light around him appeared slightly dimmer, as if his presence swallowed illumination. He was tall, dressed in black that might have been leather or silk or something else entirely. It was hard to focus on the details. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, and his face was sharp and cold and beautiful the way a knife blade is beautiful. His eyes swept the square, and Mara felt the moment they landed on her like a physical touch. They were dark, not brown or black, but dark in the way that looking into a deep well is dark, the kind of darkness that went down forever. Vampire. The word rose in her mind with absolute certainty, though she'd never seen one before. The vampires kept to the northern territories, in their mountain cities, separate from human lands. There were treaties, agreements, borders that neither side crossed. Except this one had crossed, and he was here, and his eyes were fixed on Mara and the child whose hand she was holding. He moved, and he was simply there, 10 feet away one moment and 5 feet away the next, with no visible transition between. Mara's body wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to let go of the child's hand and flee. She made herself stand still. Elara. His voice was low, with that same unplaceable accent the girl had. There was something in it Mara couldn't identify. Relief? Fear? Both seemed impossible. Father. Elara's face turned toward him and she smiled. I waited like you said. Something flickered across the vampire's face, too quick for Mara to read. His eyes moved from his daughter to Mara, and she forced herself to meet that dark gaze even as her heart hammered against her ribs. You touched her, he said. Not a question. Mara's mouth was dry. She was alone. She hadn't eaten. No one touches her. Each word was precise, controlled, edged with something that might have been fury or might have been something else entirely. No one speaks to her. Those are the rules. Those are shit rules, Mara said, and immediately wanted to take it back. Idiot. You're talking back to a vampire, a creature that could rip your throat out before you could blink. But she couldn't seem to stop. She's a child. She was standing in the sun for hours, blind and alone, and everyone was pretending she didn't exist. What kind of, she caught herself, swallowed the rest of the sentence. What kind of father does that? His eyes narrowed. For a moment she was certain she was about to die, here in the marketplace in front of everyone, and no one would help her because she'd broken the unspoken rule. You didn't talk to vampires. You didn't look at them. You definitely didn't insult them to their faces. Then Elara squeezed her hand, and the vampire's eyes dropped to their joined fingers. Thank you for staying with me, Elara said softly. I was scared, but then you came. Mara looked down at the girl, at her pale upturned face and colorless eyes, and something in her chest cracked. You're welcome, sweetheart. When she looked back up, the vampire was still staring at their hands. His expression had changed, though she still couldn't read it. After a long moment, he reached out, slowly, as if he thought Mara might bolt, and placed his hand on Elara's shoulder. We're leaving, he said, but his eyes remained on Mara. You will come with us. It wasn't a request. I have work. Now. The word carried weight, finality. Command. Elara's hand tightened in hers, and Mara realized the child was trembling slightly. Afraid. But afraid of what? Her father? The situation? Being left alone again? This is a terrible idea, Mara thought. This is how people disappear. This is how stories end badly. Okay, she heard herself say. Okay, I'll come. The vampire's other hand moved, a gesture too quick to follow, and suddenly Mara's vision blurred. The marketplace spun, the world tilted, and she felt as if she were falling while standing still. Her stomach lurched. Elara's hand remained solid in hers, the only anchor point. When her vision cleared, they were somewhere else entirely. The room was enormous, all stone walls and high ceilings lost in shadow. Tall windows let in the late afternoon light, but somehow the illumination seemed muted, as if the darkness was winning even here. Furniture hulked in corners, chairs and tables and things she couldn't identify in the gloom. The air smelled of stone and old incense and something else, something cold and metallic that made her think of winter. Mara's legs wobbled. She sat down hard on the floor, still clutching Alara's hand, trying not to throw up. "You get used to it," Alara said quietly. The vampire, Alara's father, he's her father, remember that, stood a few feet away, watching them. In this light, or lack of it, he looked even less human. His skin was too pale, too smooth. When he moved his head, the shadows moved with him, or maybe they didn't move at all and it was the light that changed around him. "You will stay here tonight," he said. "In the morning, I will return you to the town." "Why did you bring me here?" Mara managed to ask, though her voice came out shaky. "Because my daughter spoke to you. Because you answered." He turned away, moving toward one of the dark doorways. "That has not happened before." "Wait," Mara tried to stand, found her legs still unsteady. "I don't understand." "What do you mean it hasn't happened before?" He paused in the doorway, his profile sharp against the darkness beyond. "Exactly what I said. You are the first person in 6 months who has acknowledged her existence. The first to touch her. The first to show her kindness." Something in his voice cracked, just slightly, just enough for Mara to hear the exhaustion beneath the control. "I have tried everything. Every method, every approach. I thought perhaps if I left her in the marketplace, if I gave others the opportunity without my presence." He trailed off. "You were the only one who stopped." Then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows with that same impossible speed, leaving Mara alone on the floor of a vampire's castle with his blind daughter's hand still clasped in hers. "He's not good at explaining things," Alara said after a moment. "He gets upset and then he leaves." Mara looked at the girl, really looked at her. In this dimmer light, she could see the telltale signs she'd missed before, the slight translucence to the skin, the way the shadows seemed to love her, the careful stillness that was too perfect to be entirely human. You're like him." "A vampire." "Half," Alara corrected. "My mother was human. She died when I was little." "Oh." Mara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. But no one talks to me." Alara's voice was matter of fact, but her hand hadn't let go of Mara's. "Father says it's because they're afraid. Of him, mostly. But also of me. Because I'm wrong. Because I'm not human and not vampire, not really either thing." "That's not wrong," Mara said fiercely. That's just who you are." Alara tilted her head, and for a moment she looked exactly like her father had, listening to something beyond the surface of words. Then she smiled, and it transformed her face, made her look like the child she actually was instead of the strange porcelain doll she'd seen in the marketplace. "I like you," she said simply. Mara found herself smiling back, even though Alara couldn't see it. "I like you too, sweetheart." They sat there on the cold stone floor as the light faded from the windows, and Alara told her about the castle, about the library with books in languages no one spoke anymore, about the gardens where night-blooming flowers grew, about the room at the top of the highest tower where her father went when he was sad. She talked about her mother, who used to sing to her, who had taught her the lullabies that helped when the darkness felt too thick. She talked about being alone, about hearing people in the marketplace and in the towns below the mountain but never being able to reach them, never having anyone reach back. "Until you," Alara said quietly. "You reached back." Mara squeezed her hand. "Yeah. I did." Later, she had no idea how much later, time felt strange in this place, a woman appeared. Not human either, Mara realized immediately. Vampire, but older somehow, with white hair and eyes that had seen centuries. She brought food, bread and cheese and cold meat, and a cup of something that smelled like herbs and honey. "Eat," she said to Mara, not unkindly. "The master wants you in good health for the journey home tomorrow." "Who are you?" Sarah. I've been with this household for longer than your great-grandparents were alive. She set the tray down, then turned to Alara. Come, little one. It's past time for sleep. Can Mara stay with me? Alara asked. In my room? Sarah looked at Mara, and there was something in her ancient eyes, hope, maybe, or desperation, or both. Would you? Mara thought about her tiny room in town, about the rent she still couldn't pay, about the shift she was probably going to be fired from for not showing up. She thought about standing in the marketplace watching a child be ignored by everyone, and about her own brother, who'd been blind too, who'd died because there was no money for the medicine he needed. Yes, she said. I'll stay. Alara's room was less shadowy than the rest of the castle, with curtains that someone had left open to let in the moonlight. The bed was enormous, piled with blankets and pillows. Toys sat on shelves, dolls and carved animals and things Mara couldn't identify. Everything was neat, orderly, untouched. The room of a child who played alone. They lay in the bed together, Alara curled against Mara's side like she'd done this 1,000 times before, like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to lie beside. And maybe she had been. Will you come back? Alara whispered in the dark. After tomorrow? Mara thought about all the reasons she should say no. About the danger, the impossibility, the absolute insanity of befriending a vampire's daughter. About her life in town, small and hard but hers, familiar. Yes, she said. If your father will let me, I'll come back. Alara's breath evened out shortly after, but Mara lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and wondering what she'd just agreed to. She woke to the sensation of being watched. The vampire, she really needed to learn his name, stood at the foot of the bed, perfectly still in the early morning light that filtered through the windows. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were fixed on his daughter, who had shifted in sleep and now had one small hand fisted in Mara's shirt. How long have you been standing there? Mara whispered, careful not to wake Alara. An hour. Perhaps longer. He didn't move, didn't blink. She hasn't slept through the night in months. She has nightmares. Wakes crying. His voice was soft, almost inaudible. Last night she didn't wake once. Mara carefully extracted herself from Alara's grip, tucking the blankets around the still sleeping child. She stood, suddenly aware of how rumpled she must look, how out of place in this castle of shadows and silence. What's your name? She asked. Kaylin. Kaylin, she repeated. Why did you really leave Alara in the marketplace yesterday? His eyes finally moved from his daughter to meet hers. I told you. No. You told me part of it. But there's more. She crossed her arms, trying to feel brave, trying not to show how much he terrified her. You're not just testing whether humans would be kind to her. You're testing something else. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he moved to one of the windows, staring out at the mountains beyond. When her mother died, something broke in Alara. She could hear, could speak, but she... He paused, struggling with the words. She stopped connecting. Stopped reaching for anyone. Stopped believing anyone would reach for her. The healers say her mind retreated somewhere, behind walls they cannot breach. They say if she stays this way, she will fade. Become a ghost even while she lives. Mara's chest tightened. And yesterday? Yesterday she spoke to you. Reached for you. Connected. He turned back to her, and for the first time she saw past the predator, past the monster, to the desperate father beneath. I have wealth beyond measure. I have power that makes kingdoms tremble. But I cannot reach my daughter. I cannot make her believe the world is not empty of kindness. But I did, Mara said quietly. Yes. The word was almost reverent. You did. They stood in silence, watching Alara sleep. Finally, Mara said, You're afraid that if you take me home, she'll retreat again. That yesterday was a fluke. Yes. And you're wondering if there's a way to. She trailed off, not quite sure how to finish. I am wondering, he said carefully, what it would take for you to stay. Not forever. Not as a prisoner. But as. He gestured helplessly. As whatever Alara needs. As whatever would help her find her way back. Mara thought about her life in town. The tavern job that barely paid enough to survive. The tiny room with its leaking roof. The loneliness that had become so familiar she barely noticed it anymore, the way she'd barely noticed it since her brother died and her parents had given up, one drinking himself into an early grave and the other following shortly after from a broken heart. She thought about standing in the marketplace, unable to walk past a child who reminded her of everything she'd lost. I have conditions, she said. He straightened, and something like hope flickered in his dark eyes. Name them. I'm not a servant. I'm not staff. If I stay, it's because I choose to, because I want to help Alara. You don't get to order me around. Agreed. I go into town when I need to. I'm not a prisoner, like you said. I have my own life. Agreed. And you pay me. Not a fortune, but enough to live on. Enough that I'm not dependent on you for everything. Done. He moved closer, and she made herself hold still. Anything else? Yes. She met his eyes. You tell me the truth. About what's happening here. About what Alara needs. About what you're afraid of. No more half explanations and mysterious exits. His jaw tightened. That is, more difficult. Those are my terms. He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unnerving sense that he was seeing past her skin, past her bones, reading something written in her soul. Finally, he nodded. Very well. Truth. Then I'll stay. For now. We'll see how it goes. Thank you, he said quietly, and the relief in his voice was almost painful to hear. Behind them, Alara stirred. Mara? Father? We're here, sweetheart, Mara said, moving back to the bed. You're both here? Alara sat up, her face turning between them as if she could see them through sheer force of will. Together? Yes, Kaelin said. Mara's going to stay for a while, Mara added. If that's all right with you. The smile that broke across Alara's face was like sunrise. Really? Really? Alara threw her arms around Mara's waist, and over the child's head, Mara met Kaelin's eyes. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledgement, or thanks, or perhaps both. What have I gotten myself into? Mara thought. But watching Alara's joy, feeling the girl's fierce hug, she found she didn't regret it. Not yet, anyway. The days settled into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Mornings were for lessons. Kaelin had hired tutors, human ones who traveled up the mountain under heavy guard and left as soon as their sessions ended. They taught Alara mathematics and languages and history, careful never to touch her, speaking only when directly questioned. After the first week, Mara started sitting in on the lessons, partly to keep Alara company and partly because she'd never had much education herself. She was surprised to find she liked learning, liked the way Alara's face brightened when she grasped a new concept. Afternoons were for exploration. Mara walked with Alara through the castle, describing everything they saw, letting the girl run her hands over tapestries and stone walls and weapons hung in ancient halls. The castle was enormous, a maze of corridors and staircases and rooms that seemed to go on forever. Some areas were clearly lived in, maintained, but others were abandoned, thick with dust and shadows. Father's family used to be large, Alara explained one day as they stood in a ballroom whose floor was covered in a layer of undisturbed dust. But there was a war. Most of them died. Now it's just him, and Sarah, and a few others. And me. And now you. What kind of war? Mara asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The kind where everyone loses, Alara said quietly. That's what Sarah says. She says father was different before. Happier. But I never knew that version of him. Mara looked at the ballroom, trying to imagine it filled with dancers and music and light. It was impossible. The shadows here were too thick, too permanent. Evenings were for dinner, which they ate together in a smaller dining room, her and Alara and sometimes Kalen, though he rarely stayed long. He didn't eat, of course. Vampires didn't need food the way humans did. But he sat with them anyway, watching his daughter with an intensity that never wavered, as if he was trying to memorize every moment. And nights were for stories. Mara had discovered that while Alara had books, hundreds of them, more than Mara had ever seen in one place, no one had ever read to her. The tutors considered it beneath them, and Kalen. Kalen tried, but his voice was too controlled, too careful. He read the words but not the music beneath them. So Mara read to Alara every night, curled up together in the enormous bed, the girl's head on her shoulder. She read fairy tales and adventures and romances, giving each character a different voice, making Alara giggle with her dramatic readings. Sometimes, when she glanced at the doorway, she saw Kalen standing in the shadows, listening. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Mara went into town once, to collect her things from her old room and explain to her former landlord that she wouldn't be returning. She walked through the marketplace where she'd first seen Alara and felt like she was looking at a different world, one that belonged to someone else. When she returned to the castle, Alara was waiting by the door, her face turned toward the sound of Mara's footsteps, relief written in every line of her small body. "I thought you might not come back," she whispered. "I promised I would," Mara said, kneeling down to hug her. "I keep my promises." That night, after Alara had fallen asleep, Mara found Kalen in the library, a room she'd discovered by accident the previous week, all dark wood and leather and books that smelled of time and secrets. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames, a book open but unread on his lap. "She was worried," Mara said, settling into the chair across from him. "When I left today." "She's always worried when you leave." He closed the book. "She's terrified you'll realize this is too much. That you'll decide not to return." "Will she ever stop being terrified?" "I don't know." He met her eyes. "Will you ever stop returning?" It was a fair question. "I don't know either," she admitted. "This isn't what I expected my life to look like." "What did you expect?" She thought about it. "I don't think I expected anything. After my brother died, after my parents. I just existed. Worked, slept, worked again. There wasn't supposed to be more than that. And now? Now I'm living in a vampire's castle, helping raise his daughter, and reading bedtime stories to a child who might be the sweetest person I've ever met." She laughed softly. "It's insane." "Yes," he agreed. "But is it unwelcome?" She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the fear beneath the question. Not fear of her answer, exactly, but fear of losing what had been found. Fear of Alara retreating again into that unreachable place. Fear of being alone in this massive castle with a daughter he loved but couldn't reach. "No," she said. "It's not unwelcome." His shoulders released tension she hadn't realized he was holding. "Thank you." "Stop thanking me. I'm not doing this for you." "I know." His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "You're doing it for her. Which is why it works." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. Finally, Mara asked, "What happened to her mother?" Alara's mentioned her, but never the details. His expression closed off immediately. "That is not truth," Mara interrupted. "Remember? You promised." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, softly, "Her name was Linnea. She was a healer, came to the mountain to tend to injured travelers. We met during a storm. She was sheltering in one of the lower caves, and I found her there. She wasn't afraid of me, even when she realized what I was. She said fear was a waste of energy better spent on healing." Mara heard the love in his voice, even after all this time. "How long were you together?" 5 years. Long enough to know she was everything I'd never expected to find. Long enough to have Alara. His hands tightened on the arms of his chair. Childbirth is difficult for human women carrying vampire children. There are complications. She knew the risks. The healers warned her. She chose to proceed anyway. And she died giving birth to Alara. Not immediately. She lived long enough to hold her daughter. Long enough to sing her a lullaby. Long enough to make me promise I would protect her, would love her, would never let her forget that she was wanted. His voice cracked. I have kept that promise. But I have failed at making Alara believe it. Mara's throat was tight. You haven't failed. She knows you love her. Knowing and feeling are not the same thing. He looked at her again. You make her feel it. In 2 weeks, you've reached her in ways I haven't been able to in 6 months. In ways I haven't been able to since Linnea died. That's not. It is. He leaned forward. I am grateful, Mara. More grateful than I can express. But I am also terrified of what happens when you leave. When she loses you too. I'm not planning to leave. But you will, eventually. You're human. You have a life beyond these walls. A future that doesn't include being nursemaid to a vampire's damaged daughter. She's not damaged, Mara said sharply. She's grieving. She's lonely. She's a child who's lost her mother and lives in a world that's terrified of her father and treats her like a ghost. That's not damage. That's trauma. And trauma can heal. Can it? The question was barely a whisper. Yes. She said it with more confidence than she felt. I believe it can. He searched her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then I choose to believe it too. The moment stretched between them, heavy with something Mara couldn't name. Finally, she stood. I should check on Alara. Mara. He stopped her as she reached the door. When Linnea was alive, this place felt less empty. Less cold. Since you've been here, it's begun to feel that way again. For Alara, yes. But also for. He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish. For you, she finished softly. He didn't deny it. Mara left him there by the fire and made her way through the dark corridors to Alara's room, her heart beating too fast, her mind spinning with thoughts she wasn't ready to examine. She'd come here to help a child. Just a child. Nothing more. But standing in the doorway watching Alara sleep, knowing Kaelin was somewhere in the castle watching the fire and thinking about his dead wife and his isolated daughter and the human woman who'd wandered into their lives by accident, Mara realized that nothing about this situation was as simple as she'd tried to make it. She was falling in love with this strange, broken family. And she had no idea what to do about it. The seasons turned. Summer faded into autumn, and the mountain winds grew cold. Mara had been at the castle for 3 months when the first threat came. She was in the garden with Alara, describing the way the leaves had changed color, when Sarah appeared running, actually running, which Mara had never seen the ancient vampire do. Inside, she commanded. Now. Mara didn't argue. She scooped Alara into her arms and followed Sarah into the castle. They'd barely made it through the doors when she heard the sound of horses, many of them, and the shouts of men. What's happening? Alara clung to her neck. I don't know, sweetheart. Mara looked at Sarah. What is this? Hunters. The word was spat like a curse. They've been tracking reports of vampire activity near the border. They've come to investigate. But the treaties mean nothing to fanatics. Sarah hurried them down a corridor. Stay in the center of the castle. Don't go near the windows. Don't speak to anyone who isn't household. She deposited them in Alara's room and disappeared. Mara locked the door and pulled Alara close, her heart hammering. Through the thick stone walls, she could hear raised voices, the sound of confrontation. Where's father? Alara's voice was small. I'm sure he's handling it. Mara tried to sound confident. He'll be fine. But she wasn't sure at all. An hour passed. 2. The sounds outside faded, but no one came to tell them it was safe. Alara had gone quiet, retreating into that still, silent place that Mara had thought they'd left behind. It terrified her more than the hunters did. When the door finally opened, Mara nearly screamed. But it was Kalen, moving fast, his face dark with fury. They're gone. For now. He crossed to his daughter, kneeling before her. Alara. Are you hurt? The girl shook her head but didn't speak. Alara, he said more gently. Please. Say something. Silence. Mara saw something break in his eyes. She moved closer, touching his shoulder, the first time she'd deliberately touched him. He froze, his gaze snapping to hers. Give her time, Mara said quietly. She's scared. I know. His voice was raw. But if she retreats now, she won't. Not permanently. Mara hoped that was true. Let me talk to her alone for a bit. He hesitated, then nodded and left. Mara turned to Alara, who sat curled on her bed, face buried in her knees. Sweetheart, Mara said, sitting beside her. It's okay to be scared. No response. I was scared too. I still am, a little. But we're safe now. Alara's voice came muffled. They wanted to kill father. But they didn't. They will someday. Someone will. She lifted her head, and there were tears on her pale cheeks. And then I'll be alone again. And you'll leave because there won't be any reason to stay, and I'll be alone forever. Oh. Understanding crashed over Mara. This wasn't just about the hunters. This was about every fear Alara had been carrying, crystallized into this moment. Listen to me. Mara took the girl's face in her hands, gentle but firm. I am not leaving you. Not when your father is gone, not ever. Do you understand? I'm here because I choose to be. Because she stopped, realized what she was about to say, realized it was true. Because I love you. Not because of your father, not because of duty or money or anything else.